Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of No, It's Not Just the Weather podcast. My name is Ada, and here with me I have Carlota and Alfredo.
Hi.
Hello, everybody.
So, today's topic is going to be fast fashion and its impact on global textile industry, workers, and the environment. But firstly, let's start with what really is fast fashion. So, the most common definition is low-priced but stylish clothing that moves quickly from design to retail stores to meet trends, with new collections being introduced continuously. But what does it really mean? Why is it so bad? And how has the rise of fast fashion really impacted the global textile industry? What are the real consequences for the environment here in question?
So, to give you a bit of historical context now, fast fashion, we could say, became much more dominant in the 2000s at the moment where brands like Zara, H&M, and Shein, El Chain for my Spanish listeners, pioneered the idea of delivering new designs weekly. So the idea of having clothes take a week or less from the time it was designed to the time it was being sold at stores. And that was a stark contrast with the more traditional two-season fashion calendar. And it started becoming very popular. It was a hit, mainly for a few reasons, but we can name particularly that low prices make fashion accessible for a wide range of consumers. And these consumers have been encouraged to buy more with the ideas of clothes being disposable and easily replaceable when the trends shift.
Okay, but this all sounds great. You will be wondering, why is this bad? Why should we not support fast fashion? Well, there are many reasons. We have, for example, the environmental impacts of fast fashion. One of the main issues with it is that they use very cheap fabrics, like synthetic materials. Some of the main fabrics that are used in fast fashion clothing items, it's polyester and nylon. These types of textiles are derived from petrochemicals, and they are very, very bad for the environment. Just to give you an idea, this type of materials do not decompose easily at all. Polyester takes up to 200 years to break down in landfills. And just so you can picture how bad this is, polyester did not start to be introduced or used in the fashion industry since the 1930s. So all the polyester that has been made ever in history, it's still not decomposed and it's still in our earth. And apart from that, when you wash this type of clothing and fabrics, since they're synthetic, they release microplastics into the water supply. And I think there's already enough in the media about how bad microplastics are for our health and the health of our planet. Both are equally bad. And just to give you exact data, it's 500,000 tons of microplastics that are released annually from washing your textiles. This is according to Nature Climate Change.
But what's worse is the high amounts of energy and water used. Just to put it into perspective, how massive the amounts of energy used by fast fashions are. The whole textile industry accounts for about 10% of the whole global carbon emissions. It might not seem like a lot, but to put it like that, the whole aviation industry, all the flights, commercial and cargo, are responsible for 2% of
That's
the
wild.
whole global emissions. So the whole aviation industry and even the shipping combined, it's still less than the textile industry. What's worse for the water animals is that the dyeing and finishing of textiles is responsible for around 20% of global industrial water pollution. So, producing one cotton t-shirt can use up to 2,700 liters of water, which is the equivalent of what one person drinks in 2.5 years. So each year, the fashion industry produces about 100 billion garments, much of which ends up in landfills. It's estimated, actually, that 85% of all textiles go to waste annually, with around 92 million tons of waste being generated in the process.
Wow, that's actually well, it quite puts it a lot in perspective.
Terrifying, I would say.
Yes, when you put together the amount of waste each garment creates and the amount of garments which reaches the billions, it's just massive proportions. And also, it has a very strong impact on the workers, on the environment in which they are, their working environment, and
Working conditions, right?
Like the
Exactly.
social aspect.
Right, and I mean it has an interplay with the environmental things and climate change, because it has an impact. These social conditions also have an impact on the environment. So,
Yeah.
for example, there is the fact of sweatshop labor, the fact that most fast fashion production occurs in countries with low labor costs like Bangladesh, Vietnam, and India, where regulations are quite loose. Workers are often subject to poor working conditions, long hours, and meager pay. For example, in Bangladesh, garment workers earn an average monthly wage of $96, about 87 euros, which is far below the livable wage. And that creates also a lot of safety concerns. For example, we can name the Rana Plaza disaster in 2013, where a factory collapsed and killed 1,134 workers. And that highlights the dangerous conditions in which fast fashion garments are produced. And we can also say that this kind of industrial disasters also will always have a very profound impact on the environment in which they are, and on the topic of this podcast. And then we can also go even into child labor and exploitation, where there is a lack of proper regulation in many countries, and many workers face physical and emotional exploitation, and they have little to no benefits, and social protections and working conditions protections.
Yeah, that's just very sad. I don't think barely anyone thinks about any of this when you're just buying a new T-shirt from Zara, or you order a package from Shein.
Yeah, you think, well, it's just one T-shirt.
It's just clothes, right?
It's not going to change the world if I buy one T-shirt. But then so many liters of water used just to produce this one T-shirt.
Yeah, and I think that's where a lot of the issues come from in like the actual industry, like the global fashion industry, and how all the trends in fashion and how fashion is appreciated and regarded has changed over the years. We have facts like we undermine the craftsmanship of what it takes to actually create a garment, which, if you think about it, it's crazy. It's wild. You need a lot of ability. And the thing is, fast fashion has led to a decline in traditional craftsmanship and the quality of the clothing. T-shirts or tops or pants or any clothing item you can think of doesn't last an ounce of what my parents' clothing used to last. I have T-shirts from my mom from like the 80s easily, and now for me it's unthinkable that I'm going to be able to pass on any of my tops to my future children if I have them. It's just crazy how everything has changed. And the thing is that brands are pressured to produce items this cheaply, so they have to sacrifice the attention to detail. And this has also affected luxury and sustainable brands, actually, because these brands now face a pressure to lower their prices because they have to be competitive. They have to shorten production times to compete with the fast fashion giants. And then you have sustainable brands that, when they take the time to ethically source their materials and pay workers fairly, they just struggle to keep up because they're just not competitive. They cannot fight with these giant companies who can produce clothing for so cheap. And I don't think the average consumer ever thinks about this. You just want to buy cute and cheap clothes. And while we also have to mention that it's very important to have also accessible clothing, because low income people also deserve to have access to clothing that it's looks nice and you can feel like you're participating in trends and in culture. However, we have to be aware of this culture of just disposing items and just overconsumption over and over and over. Consumers have become accustomed to cheap disposable clothing, and this just leads to the buy more and throw away mentality. And on average, consumers keep their clothes for half as long as they did 15 years ago. That's just crazy. We always want to be keeping up with the trends. So this means if we buy a trendy clothing item, it's not going to be on trend in a couple of months. So just buy a new one.
So facing this whole situation, what are some solutions? What are some alternatives that that are being thought of, that some different entities, different stakeholders are proposing? Well, for instance, we can mention the slow fashion movement. This puts it in a very stark contrast with fast fashion, in which it focuses on quality over quantity, sometimes even using eco-friendly materials and always ensuring that there are fair labor practices. So in this case, it is important to distinguish between companies that are saying that they are slow fashion companies, while still being fast fashion companies, and really being slow fashion. So more than focusing on the marketing that the company is doing, we should focus, for example, on the traceability, on their actual labor practices, on their their actual environmental actions, how responsible they are regarding those matters. So, well, we brought a couple of examples of this. For example, we can talk about Patagonia and Everlane, which are companies that promote the transparency in their supply chains, and they also encourage the customers to buy less and choose sustainable products. So they're actually doing this low fashion movement, not just using it as a platform to sell more and remain in this cycle of selling and buying and selling and buying and consuming.
Yeah. What I have in mind is the Patagonia's famous advertisement of their jacket, when they put the text "Don't buy this jacket" like on their advertisement.
That's actually very smart.
So,
yeah.
But what are the other things that we as customers could do to reduce the impact of fast fashion on the environment? What comes to mind first is stop buying clothes completely, but we know that's impossible to do, right? So we can focus on buying second-hand clothes in vintage stores.
I feel like thrifting is just...
thrifting
also, it's becoming trendy, so that's actually a nice trend.
Yeah. We can, of course, support the sustainable brands. Like, if you want to buy a jacket, don't go to H&M, just buy one from Patagonia, for example. We also have to focus on recycling our clothes. So if it's not possible to sell it again or give it away, like, let's make sure that it ends up in the correct bin. But also the whole movement against fast fashion has raised concerns among brands as well. So they are...
Okay, before you continue, I also think that we have to make a remark on, while us as consumers, we have to be mindful of what we're buying, who we're buying from, I don't think we should put the shame on every individual consumer. Maybe as a young person or as a low-income person, you just don't have the disposable income.
I don't have the resources
you
to
just
buy
don't have
from
them.
sustainable.
And
we're not shaming.
and you shouldn't feel bad
only if you have the resources
for just buying the clothes you need. But if you have the ability to, we should definitely think about supporting brands that actually follow sustainability and actually follow through all the way, and not just claim that they're sustainable, but actually try to support these brands when we can and how we can. But we shouldn't be putting all the blame to ourselves, because
individuals, right? It's the corporate. Many fast fashion brands are now introducing more sustainable initiatives.
That's
like H&M recently had a conscious collection, and Zara pledges to use 100% of sustainable fabrics by 2025. Okay. So that would be great. However, such initiatives are often criticized as greenwashing. don't know if you've heard of this term.
Oh yeah.
But I found a Cambridge Dictionary definition on greenwashing, which is behavior or activities that make people believe that a company is doing more to protect the environment than it really is.
Okay, yeah, I think that sums it up pretty easily. And I also think we should think about, for example, what Alfredo was talking about the conditions of workers. Because, well, a brand can just, claim that they're using sustainable fabrics, but if they're still exploiting their workers and not paying them livable wages and having them work in terrible conditions, we still should have that in mind. Yes.
Right?
Yeah,
We're
and
missing the transparency.
ultimately, social justice usually goes hand in hand with environmental justice.
Definitely.
When there's a social injustice, oftentimes there's an environmental injustice. We are abusing the environment, and I mean it's sort of a cycle.
Yeah, it's definitely a cycle, and I think this is a great point to do a bit of a recap of what we covered, because we have to remember that these trends and this overconsumption lead to an actual environmental impact and not just in society. We have to remind that the materials that are used in fast fashion are very, very polluting. And just to remind you, I mentioned it earlier, but for me, it's just crazy that all the polyester that has been made in history, it's still in our planet. It has not decomposed. That's just
it's not even 100 years
it
old.
hasn't been. It's just wild. We also have to remember about all the energy use, all the waste we produce with just throwing clothes away, and to mention like the cyclic nature of it. If we're just asking the brands to give us more trends or more clothings, different, with all the micro trends, we're just forcing the brands to produce much more quickly. So they're going to be forced to use even cheaper and cheaper materials. They're less quality, and they're probably going to be even more polluting. So we enter in this cyclic trend that we need to break out of, because we already talked in our last episode about all the impacts of and climate change and how terrible it can be for our planet. So we definitely need to keep in mind that a change in the fashion culture, it's going to go a long way with fighting all the emissions that the fashion industry takes, because we also said earlier, it's 10% of all global emissions, and that's a lot of emissions. So if you're going to finish listening to our podcast and you want to, think about it a bit more, we definitely encourage you to reflect on your buying habits and, how often do you buy from fast fashion? Do you think you could shift toward more sustainable choices, like maybe secondhand shopping, thrifting, or trying to maybe buy from sustainable brands or sustainable materials? We invite you to maybe share your reflections with us. You can do it in our comments, or you can reach to us in our social media, however you want. And last but not least, I also wanted to let you know some of the sources we have used for this episode. You can find them all in a Google Drive link in our link tree. You can find in our bio or in our social media. But just to let you know, we have used the article Fast Fashion, How It Impacts Retail Manufacturing by Adam Hayes for Investopedia. We also used Fast Fashion and Its Environmental Impact by Rashmila Maiti for earth.org. The Price of Fast Fashion for the Nature Climate Change publication. And finally, we also have Fast Fashion, written by Dylan Kelleher for the Britannica Online Encyclopedia.
Yes, I think this sums it up for today's discussion. So if you liked it, please remember to follow us. You can find all of our social media in the bio. It's not just the weather.
Yeah, you can find us like that everywhere.
Everywhere, right. So we'll talk to you again next week, every Thursday. And next week, we're going to cover the subject of how the climate change is not really gender neutral. So I think that's going to be an interesting discussion among us. Thank you for listening, and
Bye.
talk to you next week.